internationally advantaged. The private sector locks in strategically, structurally inability by 2035. The debris there is an internalized engineering studies, profit motives, and efficient guidelines as pro and already in 22 physical economic model orbit with the killers into it first too many first will launch because they don't internalize risk impose on other user profit maximizing Galileo and shoot out of founder debris optimally second as a customer possible as long as debris coupling exists entering studies indicate that this equals property maximizing from launch satellites even after their lives and cost 30 Kessler is likely to return as on a new satellite rises new satellite application become viable make orbit these profitable costs are occurring by 2035 debris exponentially increasing current models underestimate the risk the app makes a try or die that's Shannon like between 2 fragments of 10 centimeters kill the mission for these fragments the LEOs are risk of runaway collision causation quality large generating water reef redoing experience tracking them are a huge challenge we know very little debris lose radars and telescopes and yes they cannot estimate the result models don't even agree because there's no observable constraint fragmentation below a satellite into pieces the objects are known because GSS for hardware obsolescence prevention binding regulation are still lacking remove debris to no one size fits all hard to capture middle charts at high speed without creating water debris fragmentation it leads to speedy debris that's a law of physics the aerospace.org no speedy debris moving at 10 times faster than high velocity collision travel through each other passing shock waves leave each other fragmented debris going to law orbital motion law collisions involve a lot of energy pieces are flying at extreme high space no air to the pieces down current regulatory guidelines fail answers next turn that's fully Mars and 20 companies are building mega constellations current governments for LEOs logo mass breaking their because of simulations to guys LEOs and initial stages cluster because speed managers help change defines deep space and air commercial accuracy overtakes expensive absence passing through same space causing collision risk orbiting depends on communication cooperation ad hoc volunteer do not count for debris fragmentation not confined debris shards and that's not how any human made debris degrade re-enter their time here talk away rehearse physical shards can be damaged reduce nitric oxide chemical residue can also affect those and depleted extinction that's Star in 350 million years ago there's a massive extinction due to ecosystem the fish were killed caused by UV radiation that enter energy a day we should be alert for the future rivals orbits create space conflict turn good satellites that's same standard 22 premature mega constellation orbit taken over by anti to be competition mega constellation well over 100,000 satellites in space to make mega constellation have access orbits there no any coordinating orbits there no orbit size defect see antis reach their capacity leaders be over orbit satellites first good their ability to send and receiving communication entities use of all accessible direction that could lead confrontation trigger space escalation nuclear war less Paris in 21 new actors conflict sorry the actors also were short-term approach militarized outer space exploration becomes serialized exploration of security limits rise watching in Moscow returning outer to spend nuclear warheads in space no limited nuclear wars execution that's whatever 19 nuclear nations have 15,000 nuclear weapons in pre-programming one molecular trigger MP forms of fireball rating follow buildings kill within hours lost radiation and firestorms with debris cause reduced sunlight and sharp climate change causing zero winter famine charging impact and sea student has UV radiation striking ozone layer radiation damage concentrated across the globe ready fire within minutes satellites key to preventing droughts large conflict multiplier triggers international security threats that's Kiptosh in 18 researcher developed more than 20 system droughts current exacerbation prevented partnership and methods of monitor as much and goals just water shortage plaguing countries and cities global security threat drives instability leads to right terrorism and violence harder to pinpoint location water crisis vulnerabilities out of a high policy action can be taken water wars capacity tension and region with instability or poverty attributed to Syrian civil war and military authority system these satellites imaging to monitor risk active water access water wars escalate trigger global water conflict that's Gmail and 19 IPCC warning trust and water shortage multiply conflict of food price base inflame conflict migration economic growth is impacting hydropolitical issue play on countries with high population pre-existing tension escalating river basins by 95% conflict is guaranteed in North America, Southwest US, Mexico, India, Pakistan. Water disputes over Kashmir treaty is now straining countries. Our nuclear powers give our water availability, water wars, starting good changes for competition, economic stress. Debris cascade triggers global grid shutdown. That's Silberg in 14. Imagine grid pumping electricity into without caretakers. How would they maintain balance to offering? The answer: how patrolling 2,000 miles overhead electricity into grid must equal the amount used to too much or too little to trigger power outage rebalance. Grid heat and output using algorithms to forecast and adjust to model 200,000 system individually software having real time monitoring and forecasting enable generating informative by these first. If one system goes down, part percentage total generations follow lights are only available source grid security to impact village Zuckerberg 21. Civilization role on the right facing necessity for like water food industry sustains civilization role in discovering and utilize resource large event recipe getting failure degraded industry produce urges the capacity coordinated for extraterrestrial region electricity disrupted agriculture practicing catastrophe would be accompanied by concluding or follow affected region conquer the affected countries terror creating nuclear weapons human needs to be immediately there's only a few months of food will likely run out debris triggers miscalculate war that's farther than 22 debris makes orbiters receive attack on nuclear satellites reduce extra situations satellites ready connected to returns returning countries not attack they'll be run quickly satellites standard ICBM attacks and create retaliation satellites pride comes expansion complicated war confusion is return for prelude to nuclear attack preamp framing D is defined D lexical refer to place a person place a thing appropriation that's chapter 13 the exercise exclusive control or exclusive use in their permanence by lexical 13 ancient performing action private anti cornell law private anti means commercial anti outer space lexical the physical universe beyond the earth's atmosphere is varying one third person times the third person, singular person to be unjust, jurisdiction, contrary to justice. The rule of balance by with desirability, consequences of the plan, high value morality standard, maximizing political being, extinction outweighs 8 point, destructive violence, causes covering, people can access to basic resource necessities, B point mathematically outweighs max of 14, much stronger return, 16, high 16, is a personal time we read by the we did research, when our people positive, nothing in the app triggers it, but presumption affirm 8 point is reasonable, we not be able to justify moral interactions, no prohibition with the proof obligation, B point and trivialism, statements are true, and 2 proof until you million people believe C point is negation theory, negating requires complete absence of existing obligation, negating the non-existence of, actually skip this C point, don't include that law of excluded middle, something not false might be true. Yeah, just skip C and D and permissively presumption.
Okay, for sure. Everything else is red.
Yep.
Sick. Good for Cross.
Yep.
Sure. Let's talk about the implementation mechanism. I guess why is a fee enough to deter like Elon Musk who has like billions?
Yeah, sure. So the argument that Rao makes is that it internalizes the use of sort of space onto other actors. So for example, the reason why Elon Musk is like, oh, whatever, we can just use space however we want, is because they view it as an externality, i.e. the idea that it's external to their company and only harms people that aren't in their company. But whenever an orbital use fee is implemented, it internalizes those costs, which shows that sort of imposing a cost on other actors would also impose a cost on yourself, which means they have an incentive to.
Where in the card does it indicate that the external versus like internal like motivation is going to be like what changed the game?
Yeah, I got you. However, none address the underlying incentive problems. Operators do not account for costs they impose on each other via collision. Internationally harmonized orbital use fee, correct incentives, increase the value of the space entry.
Okay, sure. Let's talk about the
below to say internalize.
Yeah. Let's talk about the O'Donnell 18 card. It seems to be predicated on like a chemical residue. I guess why does debris cause chemical residue?
Sorry, O'Donnell? Yeah, sure. So the argument is that whenever debris gets into, or whenever debris sort of deorbits, that burns up and causes this nitric oxide stuff that kills the ozone layer.
Right. I guess it's how much nitric oxide before the ozone like has a hole.
I obviously can't give you a number, but it clearly says that nitric oxide completely destroys the ozone layer. It's one of like the biggest things that can kill the ozone layer.
Okay, sure. Let's talk about Dogra 20. It seems to be describing, I guess, like the mass geological extinction event of like a billion years ago. I guess like it just kills a couple of ecosystems. Why does this need extinction now?
Yeah, sure. So the Dogda evidence also indicates that sort of systems are more interconnected. The evidence is about this sort of mass extinction that literally killed every single like anthropod. I forgot the name of the era, but it's 359 million years ago. It literally killed like every single water animal and every single land animal, which literally proves that.
Right. The extinction seems to be contextualized to like ecosystems and like fish. Why does the ozone depletion kill humans?
Yeah, it also kills like land animals. Like that extinction was very specific to how it would also kill like trees, which would kill the food that people had.
Wait, is a tree a land animal?
No, the animals that survived off certain plants, those plants would die. Like if you looked at the extinction event from that long ago, you could clearly see that was a pattern.
Sure, that's fine. Let's look at the nuclear war stuff, specifically Weber 19. It seems to talk about like fireballs, warming, of like nuclear winter, etc. I guess why does that mean extinction? It seems to just name like bad things, but never seems to indicate that like all humans die.
Well, don't forget EMP blast, but
that's important.
Yeah, the Weber evidence sort of indicates that it makes a claim that this would all cause catastrophic impacts. It indicates that multiple firestorms combined with debris clouds would cause this nuclear winter phenomenon that would cause extinction. It also indicates that radiation would cause massive amounts of damage that spreads across the globe, and nobody can escape this, which would also indicate extinction. That's a line from the card. And it also indicates that an EMP blast would form like a continual fireball, which would just like completely destroy every single person on Earth.
Okay, cool. The doc is being sent. The order is 5 off in case. The very top off is labeled as 2. It just like should be 1.
Order on the case page.
It'll just be like advantage.
Right.
And if I could get verbal confirmation when everybody gets it, because I don't have the screen pulled up, that would be great.
Okay, give me 1 second. I just got the doc. Let me download.
I'm good.
I got it. I'm good.
I'm also good.
Give me just 1 second, sorry.
Yeah.
All right, I'm good.
Okay. Jet, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. So, is anybody not ready? Okay. Awesome. First off, interpretation of different defensive consequences from within explicitly language to the data in the form of text of 1AC. Each of the ethic entails different obligation would exclude different offers or some different version of mass then. Consequences theories exclude teams would hold that pleasure most important individuals matter for their own pleasure and fight happiness and tranquility. Ego will hold the good for the self happiness and the opposite be good to describe absence to achieve spiritual qualities and fight action for everyone except for moral consequences will hold that following rules are consequences most magnum consequences focus on minimizing radicals rather than good. In violation, they don't maximize external being doesn't cut it crisp. What will be considered independent because details become standard distinguished theories the result of being as either hedonistic theories or objectiveless theories. And standard one should be shift on my choice based on whatever theory they operate under the nature of being standard, especially true because the words for the straight just right divergent consequences was coming first time witness 1 year 60 of the accident multiple contingency and second is strat. And this is going to time to the 1 AC generated offense because I know a turn is strategy I can go for doing 1 absent proof to extent check because we occur after this queue. Third resolvability because our results include way different mechanisms for the good but are probably like under hedonistic conception of each way and God is key because the we can compete arguments that clash access the balance paradigm which fairness debate come out and giving your verbals you have a better debate for actually suits fairness the debate drop the debater times with theory can compensate for the one is there's during these before communication one reasonable arbiter right gender rigid second cause with bond race for limits theories abuse they can be no RBIs one tells a mayor theory gets to be position second is about theory we should debate theory to win and want to see if theory always one self like they start the chain before down the strategy second being so no debate was already interested voting on the 1 year theory will rectify abuse third norming more speech normal for the good ideas since the show was a real early knowing outweighs a constitutive is the constitutive purpose of theory debating b sequencing is a prerequisite actually seeing the early fairness education there is introduced first so it comes collectively prior fourth all the reason why the 1 year RSQ comes under the should be valued is the reason why the 1 and C theory comes first reasonability on 1 year shells 1 year theories very operated with the 2 years aligned by language 2 hours new answers that never get responded reasonability checks 2 years and back with preventing really because 1 is still giving the 2 and a chance they drop there again 1 year shells think will build 26 shells it's 3 minutes 2 hours what is my timekeeper if 2 hours so much necessary to defend to be the 1 year 0 result you should take a round on UD slows that egg if there's the 1 shell then the drop the debater the 1 year shell now has no impact on RBIs on 1 year theory 1 year equals 20 seconds on shell and still would force the 2 and allocate at least 2/3 of the RBI sugar times always a quantifiability and second interpretation for RBI now is outer space private and refers to exclusive control outer state trap 13 appropriation with the exercise exclusive control exclusive systems of permanent limits of the nation access and violation defend the production of space or capital and topical and ownership of anything with permits there's one is limits or interpretation after about any outer space activity or trouble toward the democracy and rubber collecting ice cores launching satellites or collecting breaking solid rocks and eBay etc this was like preparation since after first the topic where no exists and second is ground the two content for the topic of nation minute emanating activity the topic letters grounded debate over solving control over space from corner generics space ownership of vast space from oxybet on temporary resource contracts addition their term nicely heating these are impacts will never be open the advantage cross apply that paradigm issues from above and third interpret the affirmative not condition act appropriation the plan on a potential effective such appropriation second violation the affirmative condition remove appropriation the factor producing agree standards that way and negative value have scale condition on potential effects artificial fiat and internally space and false for us to mitigate any of the one is even essentially fiating uniqueness the press will make will just mean whether it doesn't apply the plan doesn't apply only applies if it does the zero sign processing can be has to bite the after allowing apps to conditional effects words with a allows the after to be irreparably headed back on this they don't worry about internal link or unique and b incentivized teams to condition on impacts that are impossible to test like as a conditional appropriation not being a oppressive and b limits or same phenomenon condition possible effects of infinite appropriation angle link debating has to be done to the specific to the condition means appropriation good as it's built on exposed material to the topic also cross line paradigm issues and for the kind of rule valid voted there who best the truth of falsely resolution for one ground to last for more grounded than any of the rule valid class for infinite ground arguments of argumentation given the various spread the topic of fill it's like also that means it's sort of the value by saying as well as saying a truth that is small by the security of when either the truth value the next the truth having the implicitly accepted the environment they don't serve the truth value the next the false truth that is true anyway so conclusion other rule about the personalized debate factor decision to come here is more pressure to cause violence space where people go to escape so roll the include all of those evolved from the framework to all of the technical skill research prep for technology 5 different kind of firms to prove to negate design should be still to the truth the resolution is falsely that ways that a common usage abundantly that our roles are verified indicate one the within your time for purposes specified for second appropriation is some money but our space phenomena so money third is nature for the resolution temporal fourth hours from the center and the resolution is spatial does specified distance fifth space dimension height depth with the resolution does have volume six size and naked amount of size for the resolution is just like seven hours having official position no entity or of appropriation eighth is the existence of it compared with the attributes of the resolution is specified ninth is to be seen in the same place action possible negate all presumption and the negatives of the affluent logically happen in the status quo and the affluent burden to prove that it will prefer one text or a honest detail express logical points defined by Merriam Webster b always condition rights honest to used to indicate something that is probable second debatability a focus is based on empirical scope trends rather than just laboratory principles that have been argued about for years and b more from debate is impossible though you can only tell what is from experience and what not ought to be and third in DC the next actually trying to one is because the resolutions of direct will contest if not to the form of the right to read a new definition because one is to terms by it keeps unlocking for definition also cross apply to the truth testing definition above and again here's either a the abs one here you go to negative perception or b it's not going to happen the affirmative doesn't solve and perception of perception provability but negate one of you one of their feeling more human down to things that could be false and they could be true. It's like the theoretical just because the one year because the two-way judgment, the psychological pretty much makes it hard to beat back into the theory of anatomies coming out of the one area means that we would all lose the risk, and that means that you should presume that against fifth text of appropriation matters space except for penis space elevators or just private also heavily invested constructed penis space elevators have been orbital for use for the one is normal means mechanism. The P one still because of preparation and orbits minus 119. Since a lot of it because it is to be able to touch it takes me on to a geostationary order that is 6-7 trees count to be long tried to be non-preparation for access for position completely for gravity was only capable being held station over a single position or the second space element for superior a paint like off Caligan and other political radiation or because of space loss of pain debris fed 16 right should be like it should be minor larger reduced space and B space elevators require spacecraft launches number 3 with the major components that impact to no plus the elevators plane space a larger mass component plane the organs spacecraft launch produce people like of 21 else looking to launch over the station to example largely debris and regardless completion elevators for investment in technology Brian 16 which will lead to multiple manufacturing reduce the through already the same application research based on potential options prior to racing companies over using anti database benefits of being enormous investing cameras to take the way we think of potential revolution and take this plenty time to achievement and transforming killer 17 under exactly with every for facility carbon dioxide capture rocks release of water derates all materials nanomaterials help with mitigating pollution levels of 62% carbon dioxide with brand nanomaterials from maybe chemicals dies from the waste water self pollution are saying letting carbon nanomaterials spill up always the capital case well space celebration never reduce space and reduce overall large lunch with paid all costs Africa 19 never launching company associated with these assets and digital space operations as collision scale leaves without mitigating production during launch when you not protect your current assets with leaving so that percent solutions to elevated copy cards like electric value for criminal processes using payload cut card at payload and on case one as depletion of planes are false one it's literally happened a billion years ago it's not applicable to now cycling there's no extinction just that portions of the plants died and also third is about ecosystem not essentially humans are not they're missing internally to ecosystems kill humans and no nuclear winter because of multiple brain armors in 18 which is really small and becoming because they try to spread our high diversity BC carbon said mission reveal about to be measured representation 70% rate from them to material particles less efficient nature robot that's also what do you short during the duration of volcano activities proves right generally 18 if Monday announced we're talking about this aerosol tank limit linked to your time for usually say door small than the original gravity particles increase the rate of for your stratosphere and the evidence is you know your nucleus levels in times 17 destructive under 2 after curve to these scenarios that single generation is all to do with the current life and renew past plan more than 2,000 times cut the card at times is right but is never or actually sorry skip the church and evidence industrial civilization never occurred code 17 industrial civilization have to be able to industrial one time experience we exhaust the period as a coal oil so we're going to know so you can make this kind no matter how it's actually launched that be driven into wall materials on our ability to connect because tanks culverts are complete snags will not be able to no was rebuilding 8,000 year cut the card years new to work with stages and interfere while maybe at 18 other than between nuclear systems and factors where obviously tells the AI technology that how well we're technology produce for carbon nuclear example tells us super balls were to the cells nuclear 18 or some controls on Robinson the nuclear to be used nuclear problem number civilization reduction nuclear policy after potential for change of habitat then we're nuclear back at the top of the trigger effort to achieve regulation of technology for faster the universe 18 means we make micro bank machine and the technology using the technology program and advice over itself everything about moving atoms because that's really be able to increase population so humanity cut the card at humanity. Nothing underneath that was read. I can sit on a marked doc because a bunch of stuff was cut early.
Yeah, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to start cross first or?
Give me 2 seconds. I'm horrible at multitasking, so.
Okay. I'll go refresh my email then.
I'm good for cross member.
Okay. I guess I'll just look for the doc during cross. Cool. Okay, cool. Stats of the counterplan.
Condo.
Okay. Counterplan, why does it compete?
Right. So I guess the main point of competition / contestation is about the paint. The Ocalga 19 card specifically talks about like why the paint, or sorry, the
Okay.
Fed 16 card specifically talks about why the paint is debris. Also, secondly,
Which orbit would paint result in? Like which orbit would paint go to?
right. We could say that it could like potentially go to any of them. We should say that it's still debris no matter what orbit it goes to.
I want you to tell me like, does paint stay in an orbit and which orbit does that go to?
I can like Google that for you really quickly, and yes, we would say that it stays in orbit. Regardless, the definitionally
Okay,
debris.
sure. Can you tell me like exactly how long a paint would stay in orbit and which orbit it would go to?
Right. I'll estimate decades. It says debris left in orbit. It's about 370 miles above the Earth, whatever orbit that is. I can also look that up if it's helpful. Also, secondly, we would say that paint stays a long time. It's similar to the gases that the own affirmative defends. We would say that paint would probably stay for longer, given that it's an actual solid and like can't like dissipate. Also, paint would stay for a bit until like it gets hit by like another piece of space debris, which would like also probably not be good.
Okay, sure. I guess the first shell. Can you give me an example of a turn or any ground you lose by not specing consequentialism?
Yeah, right. First of all, the main point of the first shell is a question of strategy, how we're able to like engage in the first place, because it is contingent on like what sort of,
Yeah.
I guess.
Can you name me a list of strategies that you lose access to?
Yeah, sure. So the third point also talks about Benatar linking harder to like a hedonistic conception of util. We don't know
Would
like
Benatar not link into any other conception of util?
it's a question of how hard the link is and how we're able to like preempt the strategy of the round. Also, secondly, the fact that it, like the strategy gets affected in the first place because you didn't include.
Okay, so the only ground you lose is Benatar.
I mean, no, there's other types of philosophies that would probably link harder into different versions of util, but we outlined.
Okay, can you list me those types of philosophies that would link harder to certain types of util?
Yeah, sure. Like rule consequentialism would probably contest harder with like constitutive theories because like they're based on rules / like societal agreements. There's there's more, but I can like think of them if you want. Like so we're losing ground. There's like risk of offense on the shell. It's probably like good enough.
The trap. I mean the third off, or sorry, it's the second off, but like in the document.
Yeah, sorry, that's my bad.
Key appropriation. What part of your evidence says that debris is impermanent?
Right. It's a question of like it's a question of exclusive control of outer space and like specifically
part of your evidence says that debris is an exclusive control.
Right. It's your production of space debris. It's not necessarily people like themselves appropriating outer space. It's a question of the debris that's already been produced in the first place because it's not people like people don't own the debris once it's debris in space.
Okay, that's not what exclusive use is, but it's fine. Okay, so that's on across. Let me download the Mark doc and I'll start. Okay, I'll start. What comes first, roll the ballot or theory?
Theory.
Okay, he's 330. I'll drop that in chat. It'll be the 3 shells case. If you're testing elevators. Yeah.
Do I need any new sheets of paper?
You do not, fortunately.
Which shell are you gonna start on?
We'll say T appropriation, the condition shell spec. It's already been. Did everyone get it?
Yeah, I'm just trying to pull it up.
Lily's good. Arian appeared, they disconnected. Okay, perfect.
1 second. Just
1 second, hold on, you said?
yeah, I'm almost ready.
Yeah, okay.
Now I'm good.
Okay, perfect. Interpretation appropriation is used to deny beneficial feature use to say of no violation evidence to letting it into the 2 let's scale and 92 appropriation you violated when used to deny over an economic valuable use of land deprivation and beneficial use of appropriation for any developmental uses. We mean permanency intent to exclude exclusive obligations as Johnson 20 occupation constitutes appropriation long space of time or any other for using space harmful contamination like excluding others is taking orders levels to which occupations is appropriation of what is predictable limits is key even if there as more outside our topics way more predictable since it's normal we base our research on permanency exclusive use is way too over limiting and limiting mining you cleaner heritage debris force and lives that exists under their interpretation functional limits TLC topic you should be able to prep as that have good advantages solve the they can't lose if they can't answer to reach a core topic they should lose the sort of the conditions theory we counter interpretation we get conditions based on some conditions something based on appropriation the plan says private entities activities in outer spaces adjusted if it causes appropriation one condition example every pick says appropriation is fine as long as it does something which is conditioning appropriation on something would also incentivize unique counterplans which kill education so they're generic like if you know me if counterplans for appropriation second is solves slippery slope we can condition if it's based on appropriation so it's still bound to the topic solves competition arguments the plan establishes clear line which is conditioned on appropriation you can just read our arguments as to why appropriation based on the condition is good 4 is over limiting we eliminate every single half on the topic every single affirmative that specifies violates interpretation of appropriations condition one someone minds or violates lunar heritage has reusability with right line Lincoln American or anything else cares about sustainable education which always going on 2 months of topic interventions that double and the competing interventions we should raise the margins which is not worse but reusability allows for us to preserve sustainable education which solves for their right line argument the first detail counter interpretation will defend the violation first use direct specification tells they're bidirectional which means that it kills substantive education every single time and also causes me to infinitely specify make the what is he a 6-minute plan text anything possible for us to get an education more fairness one is just like them reading a bad form of utilitarianism or a slightly different form of utilitarianism that skirts class truth functionally a pick in the context of util second norm means evidence solves you can just read it and solves all your offense for third is afflex is good allows us to shift out of multiple frame makouts in the 1 and 2 which allows us to rectify have massively time crunch 4-minute 1 error 4 is a case you need a case list of your arguments or you lose that you lose or as no impact obviously will impact turn Benatar and the other arguments are worse for substantive education and violent in the fact that you read things like extinction is good also we clarify the extinction terribly outweighs that's clarification answering to all your questions no it's not a question of how much we link into it but rather what links in the first place obviously if Benatar or Rule Util still links to the rest of their arguments and that's not that's not just to their strategy insofar as they can still go for a link to those arguments the case page privatization, Irish space rights, expansion, democratization, technology, debris, satellites, starting out synchronization, power grids, causing eventual elements, extinction, causing the lack of basic needs like food, hours, and carbon, grid shutdown immediately cause interest, destroy modern response to host crisis, spark, yes, extinction, because the EMP scenario causes massive firestorms that would destroy the entire Earth. That's not answered by any of the rising scenarios. Radiation causes agriculture, mutation causes extinction, bills around 14 UVB radiation, fat damage, DNA damage across the engineering line, altered stability, insects and soil system shift, the altitude reduced by resulting loss of fish, production and precipitation will result, illustrate use of only 100 would you go weapons, Econ is garbage, doesn't assume that everything is launched at the same time. Reisner et al. Is also garbage. 2 and all 19 fuel oil. 2 small generating fast not right to target or fuel oil. 2 focus nothing like India Pakistan fuel value 110 times smaller than the top 50 targets. India Pakistan result cannot be declared no singularity. Also in 19 no more evil than our car. Unlikely development says itself that all the machines will not become evil and turn on as no precaution for programming. No nano. That's lockline and nobody knows how to enter such things. Self replicating robots and machines. It's not a single has been developed to space elevators permutation to build another evidence that debris from space and elevators stay in orbit, which would have defending spilled over kills
materials regimes that Hickman implemented to which all the single stage rows you mingle on many one defection would cause is effectively causes the remaining would unlike the use coercion effects the regime like responses to scramble to make claims of sovereignty based on present occupation space every cloud with satellites going in any elevators or unstable gravitational dogs because with solar wind shake the tether causing elevator crashing force the correlate force pull the elevator from vertical position causing the oscillating moving cargo cause the same in a wobble small deviation make larger errors warming doesn't cause it you can actually skip that card they just do reading impact evidence which that you should assume the case outweighs the true testing pitch all of our definitions outweigh on terms of art everything is defined in context resolution requires to be a policy action losing a state literature resolution to legislative use policy use determines all jurisdiction outweighs theory because the question of whether judge can vote on a law conflicts fairness would never run inherency double and behind a presumption assume the one so you have this 1317 advantage also you don't get negative definition which we lose on this which lists fairness every single time debatability also doesn't make sense because you need to debate the app.
Okay, 5 stripping. Was there a rule about outweighs the theory argument?
Yes, there was.
Okay, justification.
Jurisdiction constraints what the judge can vote on theory if it's not proving the truth of policy of the resolution.
Any theoretical reasons to vote out?
Sorry?
Any theoretical reason to vote out?
No.
What was the wording of the counterinterp on consequentials on the spec?
Counter interpretation will defend the violation.
Okay. Standards.
First is justifies them reading a shady form of util or like a small form of util, which skirts clash with the 1AC philosophical framework, view that as like a framework type of pick. Second is normal means evidence solves. You can read what maximizing expected well-being is like usually defined as. A third is afflex is good. Multiple framework outs in the 1NC, and we can change our 1AC framework means that we need to be able to shift out of something inevitably. And there's also a time to argument. 4 is that you need a case list of stuff you lose or there's no impact. Well, impact turn the case list that you've done so far. The first argument about rule util is bad for substantive education because it would skirt that. Substantive education outweighs 2 months to debate the topic. Second is Benatar is violent because it says that extinction of everyone is good, which is a bad norm to endorse. Extinction terminally outweighs, that was 1AC framework, clarifies the rest of your arguments. The strat questions, group all of them. It's not a question of how much it links, but rather what links in the first place. If we're winning that something links, then we can't shift out of your entire strategy, which you can still go for things like Benatar, etc. And there's also reject spec shells. A point bidirectional kills substantive education. B point makes the 1AC an entire plan text, makes it impossible for us to read arguments, which means we all lose.
Cool. The order is just going to be the spec shop. No, like nothing new. Is anybody not ready?
I'm good.
So going for the rule and paradigm issues here, no neutral responses weighing. If you can't draw a line across your flow, which was don't evaluate it. We have no third order response, which is an evaluation of a new argument functionally be considered between the negative and everyone, which is obviously fair. One is the theory concerns outweighs everything else. Is a conceded weighing coming out of the one and one is the abuse because the F abuse which the theory outweighs any F towards no RV. I say think her bears reduce factors debate theory should be away from substantive choice class because base conception from substantive fitness also didn't make an RV justification. No new RV justification coming out of the two coming out of the two area because we don't have a 3 in our and drop the debate dropping the discussion for reading abusive position in the future and quickly prevented increase in disclosure and research of people including non-TFs to KFs that are tied to the topic. Any competing interests are return there's no more what people think is reasonable. Worthwhile maybe because it takes debate on the radio stand to put it in the judge's hand because the reasonability purges the person who debated about it lose and be reasonably cause race to the bottom of race try to be as reasonably abused if they can be which is only stupid under to obstacles skills because negative track like negative use race to the top is good because it creates the best version of debate also use competing interests specifically on speculative the question how we can make the question how we can make the debate base better in order to get more nuanced clash or their justification for reasonability were really generic and on other shells that weren't even cross applied. Answer is outweighs A controls internally to education and creativity can we never get clash because the debate is structurally skewed and B assuming the general fairly valued target may you may consider the authority fairness which is the only better that's inescapable because without it we can't debate. It's competitive. It is a competitive. It's governed by rules. You can't evaluate who do better debate for the charges and use there's the gateway to debate and overview or interpretation of different events and concepts from everything much exclusively which theory good they defend and form the checks of the 1AC violation. They don't extend massive consequences of the theories include hedonism, epicurism, asceticism, rule, egoism, etc. Which there are various versions of which ways to guard our offense under consequences for but also not contesting the mass in the card, which is really good and also on borderline provides the case list for them because it's a question of how many different types of consequential framing there are. They say maximizing well-being doesn't cut it. It depends on which theory of the good that you specify because there's a bunch of different ones. There's a bunch of different ones that are explicitly different. Those are the definitions coming out of the card. Also, value the debate based on which side creates a better model of debate, which side is generated more offense than the other, or risk of negative offense. That you vote here, you vote here because most of their answers, if not all of them, were pretty defensive. We're also going for 3 pieces of offense. First, the shiftiness by not explicitly defending a theory. The good they can shift out of my turns based on whatever theory the good they operate under. Their ones for the students have the potential to justify different versions of consequentialism when coming in first, which means I don't know until a 1 year, which is the access to multiple continuous to project my 1 and C strategy formation. So they will always be ahead. That also answers their second tier. Their second point on maximization of well-being cuts it because it doesn't. Second, strats I lose 6 minutes time to the 1 AC to generate strat because I don't know what turns or position I can read against you because you can just shift out of it. And third, resolvability makes it around irresolvable since it's impossible way different mechanisms of the good. For example, Benatar be permissible not hidden stack because probably would be other opponents that the good under consequential. This that weighing ground is lost because we can't compare different arguments under operating under the framework. Otherwise, we can't compare arguments that clash access the ballot on the line by line. First starting on the stairs. 1 point they say that it justifies shady. You told me they'll skirt the clash. Over 1 point, no, it would solidify because it forces you to be tied down to one specific topic. Also, cycling the potential abuse of you shifting always any kind of narrowing down into a philosophical curve because at least it gets a specific concept, a specific theory of the good. We can read a different philosophy that would directly clash with it. But if you just say maximization of well-being and then you shift out of it, none of our philosophical offense coming out of the 1AC would matter anymore. Also, second, when we more in depth clash outweighs on our argumentation abilities. And so far, we're able to more in depthly engage with like your version of utility and the educational benefits of that would outweigh. Secondly, this normal means evidence solves because they can just read maximization well-being what it usually finds. However, one way this is preempted coming out of the one. They also did a response to the line that was coming out of the definitional card we read that said specifically this isn't good enough. And second, abstractness outweighs and third, this literally has no solvency. At the very worst, there's a risk of the shell happening and it doesn't solve for it and it doesn't solve for the offense of you being shifty in the first place. Third, the app testing is good and giving them multiple apps. However, one minute shiftiness, we read 6 minute case. If we read 6 minute case predicated on your A1 AC strategy and then you shift out of it, we'll never be able to check back against that. And those abuse massively outweighs the minute amount of good that you would get out of app testing. And also, secondly, no time scale arguments. There's a judge psychological predisposition text. Also, you can shift out of it in the 1 hour, which is any arguments that we read in the 6 minutes coming out of the 2 and wouldn't matter anymore, which means that it's a question of your abuse chain happening first. And also, third point, just because the app testing is good, it doesn't matter. You conceded that fairness comes first and is the highest layer in the round. And fourth, they say the case list, they say that there's a case list of stuff that you lose. However, 1 point, we literally give you 2 examples already, and that's good. And technically, it's a question of the model debate that you defend. It doesn't matter if we're not able to provide you 100 different examples of a case list. And also, third, we do give you a couple. We say that Benatar and things like constitutive framings would specifically link to other things. They say they're going to say that Benatar is bad, but 1 point, no, it's a question of the model of debate / the ability to engage the round in the first place. Even if it's not Benatar, it's a different kind of framing that would engage with a specific type of consequentialism that would engage with a different specific type of consequentialism that you could just shift out of it and we'll never have offense for it. And also, they say that it's bad for substantive education because Benatar is violent, but it's not just a question of us reading Benatar. It's a question of how we're able to link in the first place. We asked for an example, we give it. And also third, that the very first card that we specifically checks is because it literally defines the different theories of good and how they're different. Obviously, different things are going to link to different stuff. Also, if it clarifies the rest of the arguments over 1.0, clarification isn't good enough. That was also the work done on maximization of well-being is too generic. And also, secondly, this is very, very little. This is very, very minor. Defense is not an independent reason why it's enough to solve the harms of you potentially being shifty. And simply say the clarifying shot argument, you can clarify shot argument if we're winning something at least, and you can't shift out of the entire debate, but you can shift out enough for us to minimize our risk of offense, and then just weigh the case using things like extinction first, which you already did coming out of the 1 AR. And also, secondly, this is just like a different reiteration of the same argument, which is that maximization of well-being is good enough, but it's not because they've not contested the definition part, which tells you that simply there's a bunch of different types of maximization of well-being that are necessary, that operate differently, which different things would think differently. Instead of say that rejects factuals because A was better or actual, but no, it's a question of how we're able to engage in the debate round in the first place. Secondly, bad shell. Why do the shell is bad, and you can just beat it back or beat the shell wasn't bad, and you should have been abused in the first place. Also, beat said it makes them want to see the entirety. It makes them want to see the entirety of the lack's ability to like engage with the plaintext in the first place. The one I see is reducing counterplays, but no, it's a question of your shifting. It's a question of your shiftiness outweighing. And also secondly, if it was a bad shell, then you could just beat it back, but it wasn't because you were explicitly abusive in the first place. I'm like because you were abusive in the first place. Also, spec shells are inherently good because it allows the debate to have more clashes, more in-depth clashes, which is the entire point of debating in the first place. And on the and on the world about about ways. One point theory engagement in the first place. Theory precludes our engagement in the first place. So the only reason we're able to engage in the round. If you weren't fair when we weren't able to engage, then that's an independent reason why it comes first. Well, secondly, you can see that one NC theory comes first. We'll cross-apply the justifications coming out of the one, and it was contextualized to the one. It was contextualized to one NC theory coming before 1 AR theory, but the justifications in them were for norming because we were more species over norming to decide whether or not the shell was a good idea. Creating that norming is better for the debate space and just like a roll of the ballot. Judge jurisdiction doesn't matter. That was competing interests.
Okay, I'll start. Okay. Briefly case the show. Everyone good?
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm good.
Read. Okay, great. Extend the advantage privatization, our space drives exponential debris because the democratization of technology, debris hits satellites, touching out synchronization of power grids. We see cascading effects like culminating stations due to lack of basic needs like food. That was conceded argument, which means that anyways that we're winning defense on theory should mean automatically vote F on substance. The theory page overview, massive amount of defense was conceded. If you can't tell me why a model debate where every single debate is Benatar or some obscure ass framework is good, then do not vote for them. Going for reasonability, conceded both of our answers to their competing interpretations argument, which means that anyways that reasonability is good should be sufficient for you to automatically vote affirmative. Reasonability is good with the bright line blanket impact turnaround because it preserves substantial education, allows us to actually debate the topic. Conceded outweighs on time frame because we can only debate that for 2 months. That was conceded. The limelight, the argument's proper. Intervention was inevitable with the conceded argument out of the 1 AR. That was flagged as a reason as why intervention is inevitable, which proves that there's terminal defense to intervention insofar as intervention happens in every single debate round. So there's no reason why we should not use reasonability in the first place. Could be race to the bottom. Conceded both arguments versus that doing it for the bright line of substantive education solves the race to the bottom because we're doing it for something good, i.e. substantive education. Also, you conceded competing interpretation is worse because it creates the race to the margins where we try to be be as minimally abusive as possible, which leads to the worst forms of fairness, unfairness, and education, because it would just incentivize things like frivolous theory. The last argument I'll go for is yes, 2AR weighing. Obviously, if they made weighing arguments to the 2AR, we should be able to respond to that in the 2AR, which is why otherwise we'd all lose every single time. The not crossed by the shells, yes, obviously, reasonability is a universal paradigm issue, so it's crossed by every single one of the shells. The rest of the arguments don't matter insofar as there's terminal defense to their fairness offense, but education outweighs anyways. All their competitive activity stuff. It presents that debate is competitive activity without educational value, but the end goal of why we do debate is because of education, which is proven by all their arguments. Even if it's a gateway issue, that doesn't matter insofar as we're winning the fact that education is that terminal end goal, which means that any substantive defensive fairness means that education automatically outweighs the defense page proper. It should be telling that Lilly could not tell you a single framework that actually is unlinked to by not specifying consequentialism. They only said quote constitutive frameworks, which literally does not mean jack shit. And they said Benatar is their second caseless argument. Literally, if that is a model debate you want to endorse, then automatically vote negative. But that model debate is absolute garbage. Conceded that completely destroys substantive education and is completely violent. And the sort of arguments that they justify is they just said that Benatar is good because of the question of models. But no, our arguments that you would be incentivized to read Benatar because you would know that it links to their model of under their model debate, which is net worse because it justifies things like violent theories of power, etc. The last argument is that they conceded that none of their arguments don't completely evaporate, but rather they only sort of the link only sort of marginally goes down, which means that all their shiftiness outweighs. Arguments should be taken with a grain of salt insofar as those are only mitigatory defense. The argument I'm going for is Afflex is good. I only have one framework versus a 1 and T that can make multiple hijacks of independent voters on my framework, which makes it impossible for us to be affirmative. That means that we need some one-air flexibility within the 1 AR. The no solvency argument, yes, solvency. If we get to shift out of it, it's good because you have multiple outs, which is the whole point of the argument. That was the structural skew, which outweighs because it's the only thing that's reversible via theory. The minute shiftiness outweighs argument. No, you conceded defense to shiftiness, which means that Afflex should outweigh because the affirmative is impossible throughout the entirety of the 1 AR because that's because of that. Judge psychology also doesn't make sense. It's an empirical claim without empirical warrant. They conceded massive amounts of defense, which means you vote negative affirmative on reasonability or the counter interpretation outweighs. Good debate.
Good debate.
Hey Lily, just asking, are you a senior?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we're all in.
I'm here.
Lily, got Jet. Do we have Reed and do we have Aryan? One. Where is the other one? Cool. Y'all good with me announcing, right? Cool. All right. This was a fantastic debate. Congratulations to both of you for making it to octafinals of the Tournament of Champions. Hats off to both of you. This was a fantastic debate. The decision is a 3-0 for the affirmative from Straight Jesuit. Lily, I know you're a senior. Do you want to listen to RFDs or are you good?
Yeah, no, I'll listen to RPs.
Okay. Then I'll start. I'll preface this by saying, Lily, you had a fantastic career, and I am so glad I got to judge you a shit ton this year. Every debate with you is always wild because, like, it's always just a theory debate. But the theory debate that you do is like really good, and you are arguably, if not one, or you were one of, if not the best theory debater on the circuit, in my opinion. And I think that you should take pride in the career and how far you have gotten, and the accomplishments you have achieved. Like every debate with you, I have had to think because your arguments are so intricate and just like hands down fantastic. So thank you for letting me be a part of your career. But yeah, the RFD problem. I vote affirmative. I think that the 2AR wins reasonability and then just a risk of defense and like a minor risk of offense, which makes me think that debates under the affirmative model are possible, which is sufficient to affirm under reasonability. So I go to the competing interest to be reasonability debate proper. I think that the 2NR doesn't have sort of an extension / an answer to this terminal defense that the 1AR puts. It's not the best piece of defense, i.e. judge intervention is sort of inevitable because the judge has to make a decision somewhere and sort of decide the debate in one place. I think that's sort of a sufficient enough argument here, especially since I don't think that the 2NR has a really sufficient answer. I think that the 2AR extending this as terminal defense probably good, probably enough. I then go to the second justification that the 2NR extends, which was this like race to the bottom impacts, which still concedes this sort of link turn argument that the 2AR goes for, which was just like competing interps incentivizes a race to the margins in favor of very minuscule interps, very sort of minuscule impact stories, which seems to me that it creates sort of it justifies the substance crowd out, which outweighs on time frame because we can only debate the topic for so long. So yeah. Then I go to the interp debate problem. I think that the shell at the end of the 2NR doesn't have a really well-developed impact story. I think part of that is because I think that the 2NR goes for too much. I think you should go for one of these standards. I think resolvability is probably the best one since I don't really hear a good answer to it in the 2NR or the 1AR. And I think that there could be some really good weighing about sort of resolvability, sort of link turns all your arguments since it sort of determines the ability of the judge to sort of make a decision about sort of theories of good and how those interact with each other. But absent that, I think that the 2NR just gives or goes for too much, which means that your time spent on the counter interp proper is just like not sufficient. I.e., I think that the 2AR is winning just like, or specifically, I think that the 2AR is winning this sort of Benatar argument. I thought this was pretty persuasive. Explicitly, the 2NR or that the negatives model debate sort of incentivizes sort of violent arguments that sort of crowd out substantive education about the topic, which seems to outweigh there was one more. Yeah, that in addition to these like no ground loss argument, like and these like several examples I think the 2AR gives about how sort of like you can still engage and there's like a very minimal link differential between each different framework. I think that was a pretty good convincing argument coming out of the 2AR, which I think minimizes a lot of the impact or the residual impact 2NR goes for. So yeah, that means that on a face value, I think that the affirmative interpretation sort of presents a reasonable model of debate in which the negative can engage. I then go to the fairness of the education weighing. This was a little bit more messy because both of these were new at the end of the debate, which means that I sort of have to just like decipher between them. I think that the 2AR wins that, or I think that the 1AR or the 2NR needs to terminalize why fairness is an impact. You give several reasons about why it sort of constrains my ability for how to evaluate the ballot, but I don't really see a reason why that sort of or how that sort of terminalizes as sort of the best end goal of debate, I guess, which I think the 2AR does sufficiently. So yeah, once again, fantastic debate, and thank you so much, Lily, and I will miss your presence on the circuit next year.
I can go next. I agree with a lot of what Holden said. Also, yeah, I mean, I haven't been judging you as much this year, Lily, but I did judge you last night. And it's unfortunate I didn't get to vote for you because you're very good, and it was definitely a pleasure watching you debate. So I'll get that out of the way. But yeah, I think like I actually kind of think that I can vote. Like I think the app is like winning more offense than defense in the 2AR. I think like I agree with Holden's point that like the 2NR probably undercovered some key parts of the 1AR that just put you in like a tough spot, even though like the 2NR execution was good. In particular, like the first place I look on the flow is this app flex standard. I don't think there's like really an answer from it by the 2NR. And given all the contextualization the app's doing about like the lack of strength of link to shiftiness, or like the size of that impact, right? All that comparison makes me feel comfortable that like the app probably does have like more offense under competing interps. So I end up just like not really thinking that I have to resolve reasonability or competing interps as a paradigm, because I just think the app is winning that it's good to shift, right? It's good for the 1AR to have some leeway in terms of like clarifying their framework, because otherwise they would just lose to like neg up layering, and that's just like extended. And then like so given all the other contextualization and weighing that is done that Holden mentioned, that means that I think that app's just winning offense, and then kind of just vote app like by default at that point if I think he's winning theory. So it ended up being somewhat simple. I do think like I agree that the 2NR could have benefited from like more clear impacting. I don't think you necessarily went for too much, but I do think that like if you're going to go for shiftiness, you have to answer what is essentially like an impact turn to shiftiness. And then, yeah, I also agree like resolvability could have been an interesting route to go down to. I guess I'll say like, just to throw this in there, like, I don't think the like, oh, your interp means we only have Benatar debates is like offense for the app, because I don't think that I'm willing to grant that Benatar is like violent just based off like this assertion in the 1AR. I think the point of this shell is that there's a lot of intricacies under util that we don't tend to explore, and I think that this is a perfect example of that. So like I'm not gonna like grant that Benatar is like something we should try not to encourage or not, right? I just think like I think what that does for the app is that it probably shows that, like, I think that the issue with your strategy is not that you were like trying to say that Benatar is a piece of ground you should have, but that you didn't have like other examples. And so the fact that it only came down to that one example meant that it probably is a fairly small potential for shiftiness, right? Because like what would be the clarification in the 1AR that would be so damaging if it's not like a simple jump from, right, like say like hedonism to rule util, and then that would be where Benatar maybe would become a relevant piece of ground that's lost. So like I end up just thinking like, yeah, like shiftiness is just like a small impact, in the app basically impact turns it and does like comparative weighing in terms of like 1AR being time crunched, etc. So yeah, sort of just vote on that. Happy to answer questions though if y'all have them afterwards.
Yeah, my decision was basically similar to Reed's decision. I think the app is winning the shiftiness argument, which means that I didn't really look at the reasonability flow, but also I think the app is also winning reasonability. So yeah, and also a great career, really. Any questions?
That all was very comprehensive for me, but thank y'all for judging, and Jet, good luck.
Sure. Thank you so much,
Okay,
Lily.
thanks for
Have a
judging.
great rest of your day.
Good debate.
Get some rest.
Thank you. Bye.
See ya.